Hi, fourth graders. It's Mrs. DeBeer teaching from the camper classroom. Today I'm going to read you a story about an old-fashioned radio, and it's called Ron. Oh, you can't see that book. It's called Ron's Radio, and it's written by Fiona, illustrated by Eric Scott Fisher. And this is one of my favorite stories that we read in fourth grade because this is a picture of my mom and dad and my mom and dad's very first radio. So I have a connection to this story because it reminds me of my mom and dad and their first radio. Look at that, and their record player sitting on top and how big it is and their knobs. And I have their radio in my house right now. So I think that's really cool. Anyways. Ron's Radio. Gonna try to make it so you can see all the words. It's historical fiction, which means the radios are real, but the story is made up and the characters are made up. Guess what? Said Ron, as Jimmy climbed into the treehouse. My family is getting a radio. Is your Uncle Joe building you one? Jimmy asked. No, but he'll be able to help Dad set it up, said Ron. He's been working on homemade radios for more than a decade, ever since he got back from the war. Jimmy smiled. Ron was always talking about his uncle. Jimmy recited, You told me that Uncle Joe builds his own radios. Once he let you listen through the headphones, and you heard a message from a ship. But I'm not talking about a homemade radio now, Ron said excitedly. This radio has the latest technology. We'll be able to listen to whatever we like. Ron's father poked his head into the treehouse. You boys won't be allowed to touch the radio. Remember what you did to my clock? The boys squirmed with embarrassment. When they were trying to figure out how the clock worked, they had pulled it apart. Then they couldn't put it back together. This radio is not a toy, Ron's dad said. It's a wonder of modern engineering. Stop and check. Why won't Ron's dad allow the boys to touch the new radio? Chapter 2. When the radio finally arrived, Ron couldn't stop looking at it. It was tall and it stood on the floor. It had a gleaming wooden cabinet. There was a speaker at the front so everyone could listen at the same time. Ron thought it was beautiful. Uncle Joe and Ron's dad set up the radio in the living room. Uncle Joe turned the dial, or knob. He turned into a station to hear what was playing. There was a shh, shh, shh noise and then a blast of music. It looks easy to use, Ron's dad said. Ron thought so, too. They moved the furniture around. Ron's mom directed or showed where to put everything. Now everyone could sit and listen to the radio together. Boom. Uncle Joe gave the radio a final check. You could use this dial to find a station, he said. I can't wait to hear all the programs, Ron said excitedly. You'll have to, said Ron's dad. I don't want you going near the radio except when we listen to it together. Stop and check. Why does Ron's family move the furniture? Chapter 3. The Accident. Ron and his parents sat around the radio every evening. Ron sat quietly so his parents could hear every word. Ron's parents listened to the news. They liked hearing about events in faraway places. In different countries, the radio news was current or up to date. They heard about things almost as soon as they happened. Ron thought the news was boring, but he liked the programs about science and technology. He enjoyed listening to stories most of all. One day, Jimmy came over when Ron talked about the radio. Jimmy was fascinated. Wow! Can I please see it? He asked. The boys scouted around to make sure Ron's parents were not around. Then they snuck into the living room. Jimmy stared at the radio. It's beautiful, he said. Ron turned on the radio station and moved the dial until he found a station. The boys were listening to the radio when they heard the front gate open. They jumped up in a panic. Jimmy looked out the window. Ron's parents were home. Jimmy cried, "Quick, turn it off!" He nudged Ron to hurry him up. Ron slipped and banged into the cabinet. Everything went quiet. There was no sound from the radio. Ron felt sick. "Go home, Jimmy. It's my fault. I'll figure out what to do." Stop and check. What programs do Ron and his parents like to listen to on the radio? Chapter 4. Uncle Joe to the Rescue. Ron told his parents about the radio when they came inside. They weren't angry, but they were sad and quiet. Ron felt terrible. "Maybe Uncle Joe can fix it," he suggested. Uncle Joe soon arrived. Everyone watched as he took the back of the radio and started tinkering with it. "Ron, please go and get my toolbox," he said after a while. Ron handed the toolbox to his uncle. Uncle Joe found a tool and used it to reattach a wire. When Uncle Joe went around to the front of the cabinet, Ron held his breath and squeezed his eyes shut. Suddenly, a voice sang out from the radio. Ron almost cried with relief. Ron gave his uncle a huge hug. "Thank you, Uncle Joe. I promise I'll never touch the radio again." Then his father whispered something to Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe nodded and grinned. "You can never touch this radio again, Ron," his dad said. "But I know you love listening to the radio, so you can have your own radio instead. Then you won't need to go near our radio." He looked at Ron's mom and she nodded. "You'll need to earn the money and pay for the radio parts," Ron's dad said. "Then Uncle Joe will help you build it." Ron was stunned. "Really?" he said. Ron's mom grinned. "Ask Jimmy to help you. That should keep you both out of trouble." Stop and check. Why does Ron's father decide that Ron should build a radio of his own? I hope you enjoyed the story today. See you soon. Bye-bye.